Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Zerion Identity Management. My name is Jonathan Su, and I will be hosting this webinar today. And we will have Berit Johannessen presenting. Moving forward to some of the announcements that we have coming up. Some of the news and updates that we have are the release of Zerion Academy. Berit and I have been working very diligently on getting as much content up there as we can as possible. I know currently we have all of our webinars, both past as far as 2017 is concerned, as well as the upcoming webinars there, as well as multiple learning plans and courses that we're including, so that you'll be able to have a central location for all of the training resources you need for the Zerion products. Additionally, we're going to be having a Form Builder certification course on April 4th, 5th, and 6th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Time. If you would be interested in becoming Form Builder certified, then you can click on that link for more information. Finally, the next 3 upcoming webinars we have are going to be Zerion Spotlight on Customer Solutions on March 16th. During that webinar, we will be having customers present their solutions that they've developed using our software and give them an opportunity to share the great work they've done. On March 29th, we'll be having a webinar called Getting Started with Data Integrations. I will be presenting that webinar, and we'll be talking about how you can integrate your data, whether it is on iForm Builder or through another file, and using that to integrate with other systems. And then finally, on April 11th, we'll be having a webinar titled Setting Up Real-Time Dashboards, and we'll be having one of our solution engineers, Ben Ray, presenting on that one. He's going to be showing us how we can set up some dashboards using the Zerion Reports web service, and how you'll be able to improve your data analytics and decision-making using those. With that, I'd like to hand over the reins to Berit and let her begin her presentation.
All right, thank you so much, John, and thank you everyone for joining today's session. As John mentioned, my name is Berit, and I'll be giving you a tour of Zerion Identity Management. And to continue, so for today's webinar, we're going to go through 3 separate topics and dive a little bit deeper into all 3 of these. By the end of this session, I hope that you can answer all 3 of these. The first is Zerion Identity Management. What is it? The second is, what is it made of? And the third is, how do I use it? Going on, let's go to that first question. What is Zerion Identity Management? So Zerion Identity Management is a part of the Zerion web service platform, and it allows organizations the ability to securely define and regulate individual or groups of users' identity and their access levels within the Zerion web services, so within the Zerion world. Lately, I've been watching too many Marvel movies or whatever it may be, but I think of the Zerion web services as like a Marvel universe, so a Zerion universe. So with these with ZIM, you're able to define what people's roles are and what superpowers they have within the Zerion universe. But let's jump into that second question. What is it made of? So Zerion Identity Management is made of 3 key components. It's made of our users, our groups, and our policies. So with that being said, as we go forward today, we're going to go through what the users are, what the groups are, and what the policies are. But knowing that there's these 3 key components, it's also important to know that these 3 key components can work separately, and you can use them and edit them at any point within the Zerion Identity Management. And next, how do we use it? So the first is you must have access to Zerion Identity Management through the Zerion web services. The second point here is that you set up these processes, and they can change based off of the preference that you have in this setup process. And the last thing to note is that you can edit users or edit groups, edit policies at any point and in any order. All right, John, I answered those 3 questions, and now the webinar is over. Just kidding. We have a lot more to do here, but are there any questions coming in at this point that you'd like to address with everybody?
So far, there have not been any questions, so it sounds like everybody is understanding exactly what you're talking about.
Perfect. And if if those of you, if this is the first webinar you've attended, I'm very sorry. I do have a cold right now, so I'm hoping that I can get through this without coughing or anything. And for those of you who worked with me before, I'm also sorry that you have to listen to me with the nasally cold. But let's go ahead and jump in to the Zerion universe. Okay, so now you should still see my screen, and you should now be looking at the Zerion. So I've logged into my Zerion account, and for those of you who have a Zerion account, yours may look a little bit different because this is our testing environment. But what you'll see here is I have a tab for my identity access management, my data flow, my reports, data collector, as well as documents in the academy. Today, we're only focusing on the identity management, so the ZIM world, and that's where we'll jump into. Immediately, once I log into Zerion Identity Management, I'm brought to my dashboard. So within my dashboard, I see how many users I've created, how many groups I have in here, as well as how many policies I've created in here. Now, those policies and groups and users, they don't only need to be the ones I've created. I can also see the ones that other individuals within the same account as me have generated. So this is helpful just to give you a quick snapshot on where everything stands, especially if you're worried about how many users you still have remaining to create more users within your accounts. So the first step we're going to go into today is the users. Now, as I mentioned before, when it comes to creating and editing and updating, it doesn't matter if you start with the users, the groups, or the policies. Today, I'm going to start with the users and go down through this process because this is where most of us are used to this kind of thought where you always start with the users. But eventually, I think you'll find yourself when you're in Zerion Identity, you actually start with policies and then go through to groups and then users. But it's up to you with your preference on how you like to set it up. So here we'll go into users, and I'll create a brand new user so you guys can see what that looks like. So once I'm logged in here, I have my create button in the top right hand corner, and most often in these different screens when you're going through the creation, you'll always see the button at the top right corner.
Real quick, actually, everybody, a question did come in, and I wanted to go ahead and address it because I think that it may be something of concern that other people are wondering. And one of the attendees asked if ZIM requires extra licenses, and I wanted to go ahead and speak to that in a little bit more of a broad sense. But I wanted to make clear that ZIM is part of this umbrella of web services that we call ZWS, or Zerion Web Services. If you're a current iForm Builder user, this umbrella of services is actually different than having an iForm Builder account. So in that sense, it would require extra licenses. However, when Berit went into the console earlier, you may have noticed that there was an icon for a web service called Data Collector, which actually is the mirror of what we provide in iForm Builder, except under the Zerion umbrella. So to answer the question directly, yes, it does require extra licenses. To be a little bit more broad about the question, I just wanted to make it clear that Zerion Web Services is a growing collection of different services, including our data flow automation. ZIM is included within this, also our Zerion reports, and so that's separate and exists separately from iForm Builder. So if this is something you may be interested in, let us know and we'll be able to give you more information about it.
Great, thanks for jumping in there, John. And going off of that, with this, we're going to create our first user. And one of the best practices that I found is just having some sort of naming convention when you create your users. A lot of times it makes sense to use the beginning of an email address. So right now, I'll create a new user, and I'll have this one as just B.Johannessen. When I create the user, I can this is also where I'll create the password. For any account that when you create for a new user, you usually have to fill in this information. Now, the next step is a really important step. So once I hit create, I am immediately brought up to the screen with a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and it's telling me that a user's been created. Now below, what we have here is what we call an access recovery code. So within Zerion Identity Management, we're really focused on security. And this is one way that we ensure that security measures are being met. So every time a new user is created, a new recovery code is also created. So you should always download that recovery code. Now, if you're creating a user for someone else within your company, then you'll want to make sure that you download the recovery, and then you'll email that recovery code to them. And at that point, when it comes time for them to log into their Zerion account, they'll use that recovery code to create a brand new password for themselves. So anytime I edit my password, I'll also create a new recovery code and need to make sure that I download that. In the presentation that I'll send over to you later, I do document how important that recovery code is, as well as how important it is to keep it stored in a safe location. All right, so now that we've created our user, this individual has no rights within the Zerion world at this moment. So if I were to have this person log in, then they wouldn't be able to access anything within Zerion. All they'd be able to do is log in. So at this point, we can either, if we've already created policies for them, then we can assign them to a policy, or best practice is to assign them to a group. Now, groups are extremely valuable because they allow you to expedite your processes a lot faster in the sense of assigning access and individual rights to the different Zerion web services. So at this point, as we go through this process, we've created our user. So now let's create a group for this user to reside in. Now, as you go forward and you use Zerion Web Services and Zerion Identity Management, then you'll probably find yourself creating multiple users in that initial step and then adding all of those users within the group during this step. So let's go ahead and create a new group. And all we'll do here is just call this webinar group. And we are then brought to our list of users. So let's find the one we just created. And this is my Berit Johannessen. And I have a couple other usernames in here, so might as well put all of them within this group. Keeping in mind that when we create this group is going to be assigned the same policies later on. And a user can be a part of multiple groups. Now, I keep throwing this term around policies, but I really haven't dived into what policies are and what they look like. Before I do that, John, are there any questions about users or groups?
So far, no extra questions about users or groups, Berit.
All right, great. So without assigning policies, then the users don't have any access to the system yet, but we want to make sure that we give them access right away. So if you're an admin and you're thinking about this process from the admin side, you don't want to share those recovery access codes to your users until you've actually given them permission into the system, because otherwise they might be a little bit confused on why they can't access anything yet. So with a lot of services that we use these days, we're finding that we're limited on what rights and permissions we can actually give to our users. Well, this is where Zerion Identity Management allows you to truly define what rights and permissions that they have. So when we start and we go under policies, we see a list of policies that are already in our account. Now, for those of you who have a Zerion account or are looking to have Zerion account, you'll find that you'll have a set of standard policies built into your account when you access it originally. The specific standard ones that we have really are for each Zerion web service. So there's one for data flow automation, there's one for data collector, there's one for reports, as well as one for documents. Now, we can go into these at any point and edit them, or I can assign that new user I just created, I could give them a data collector rights right away. So let's go through the process of actually just adding a user to one of these policies, which can be done here through the policy screen, or I could actually go back to the user and edit it later, but I'll kind of guide you through what a policy would look like before we actually create one. So here in the data collector, I've just selected that policy from that list. And beneath, if I scroll down, beneath the data collector, I do see what users I have. So I have 2 users currently assigned. And this is where I can add my new user and assign my new user to this policy. Additionally, I could go under groups and assign the new group that I had built to this policy as well. So let's assign our new group, because that's one of the best practice we have. The more often that you can use groups, the better your management's going to be, and a little bit easier it will be as an admin. Here I see my webinar group, and all I have to do is click add, and that's it. So that's pretty easy as far as adding to a policy, but I want to show you a little bit more of what is in a policy. So a policy is made of permissions, and within each permission is where you are able to kind of define the actions as well as the resources that somebody has. So a policy can have multiple permissions as well. So let's go back and create our brand new policy. And for best practices, we're going to use a naming convention, and we'll stick to the one that we had created before, which was just our webinar. When creating a new policy, you actually have 3 different options. So the first one is your policy generator, and this is the one that I suggest that anyone who's becoming familiar with ZIM, this is where you start, because this walks you through step by step on how to create those permissions to be included within your policy. The one underneath allows you to copy an existing one. And so this is where, if you are going to make any changes to a current policy that's in play, I would suggest actually making a copy first and then editing it in case you make any changes that aren't really what you want. So it's almost a way to have a backup as well. And the last one is to create a new custom policy. And when you create a new custom policy here, this is where you're going to go very, very granular. And this is where I suggest that you make sure that you are familiar with how to create policies, and you've actually gone through the first 2 before jumping in and creating a new policy on your own. So the way I actually think of this is as it goes from the easiest to more complex in how to create these different policies. Now, if I'm going a little bit too fast, I do want to remind you that I do have the slides in here going through what these are, and I actually defined it a little bit further on the policy generator, copying existing, as well as creating a new custom policy and what they look like. So at this point, we've done the basic steps. We know we've added our name. We know we're going to create a new one. And since we're brand new, we're going to go under the policy generator. So once we hit next, this is where we're adding our permissions. By default, we are always going to allow. Now, you may find, and there are very few cases that you want to come in here and actually hit the deny button. The deny button is great if you are creating a policy that's maybe for an individual user or a few users, and you want to make sure that no other policy is giving them permissions to a specific resource or a specific service. So, for instance, I may want to, the only time I can think of, at least right now, that I'd want to come in here and have the deny selected is if I am creating, if I know I have users assigned to multiple policies that give them access to data flow automation, but maybe there's one user that I just want to make sure that they do not have access to data flow automation, even though they may be assigned those other policies. And that's where I'd come in here and I'd select deny instead of allow. But for today, we'll go through the process and we'll go and create a permission for allow to occur. So underneath that, I'll go under my services, and this is a list of all the different services that I have access to in the Zerion world. And today we'll go under the data collector. Now, you'll notice I have billing as well. That's something that's just internally, so if there were any questions about that, I wanted to just flush that out quickly. So now under data collector, I'll go under actions. So these are the 2 actions that can be completed within data collector. If I were to go back and select data flow automation, I now see a lot more actions. So this is where ZIM allows you to get much, much more granular. But this is also where you see that these actions are very specific to whatever service was selected from the list. So I can go through here and I can, define exactly what this permission is going to allow. So are they going to be able to list the data flows? Are they going to be able to create and update data flows? One thing that we have here as well is, are you going to allow them to delete data flows or export? So there's a lot of different options here. And I'm only going to allow a few of these to occur. And then before I go on to the resource section, are there any questions, John?
Yeah, Berit, we actually did have a question come in. We had somebody ask if they're a current iForm Builder user and they were to begin working with the ZWS platform, would their iForm users be in ZIM, or are the 2 systems separate?
Great question. So that's actually up to that customer. So if they want to have the 2 be separate and they want their users to continue to exist within their iForm Builder account, and maybe if they're using a dedicated database, they want to continue to use that dedicated database, then those users would not be within the Zerion account. Now, if they're trying to have all of their users go through the data collector and have everybody under one roof under Zerion and no longer use iForm Builder, then we could talk later, but we are planning on allowing customers to have their account migrated into this universe, essentially. And if that individual has more questions or wants more details, we can definitely discuss that at a later time. Any other questions,
Thanks.
John?
Yeah, there was actually one other question. I actually answered it in the control panel, but I think I might have hit send to only the person who asked and not everyone. So I just wanted to go ahead and answer the question for everyone to hear. But they basically asked what the benefit of using groups was, and I explained to them that when you're using groups, you're not assigning individual users to individual policies. So say, for example, you had 10 policies and you had 10 users. That's going to be a lot of assignments where you have to give each user each one of those policies. However, if you had all of those policies assigned to a single group, then all you would need to do is add the users into that group. So it reduces the increased burden of doing the assignments, especially as your projects continue to grow. And I just wanted to let everybody know that.
Great, John. Thank you for mentioning that. You hit the nail on the head with that one, for sure. Groups they will save you so much time and so much effort, and I can't stress the importance of them enough. So I think you did a great job with that. All right. So as we continue, I've gone ahead and typed in our resource. Now, what this is the resource is actually identifying within that service and within your account what the user is going to have access to. So to start, you'll notice I typed in ZWS, so that's Zerion Web Services. And then after that is just the servers, and then we have QA test, and that's the account that I'm logged into. So for those of you who are already Zerion customers, this would be whatever your account name would be. And then at the end, you'll notice I have an asterisk. This asterisk is saying that I'm giving access to all of these actions as well as all of the different resources within data flow automation. So down the line, when you're allowed to share and export and import different data flows, and John's able to see my data flows and whatnot, I may want to have it so that he can only see some of them, and that's where I can create, where I have the asterisk now, I could actually go into more detail and put an ID of a data flow that I want them to access, or maybe I don't want them to access, so I want to deny access to. So at this point, I'm going to copy this resource because I'll need this shortly, but I'm going to go ahead and add this permission, and I see a list of it located on my permission screen at this time. Now, right now, we've only added one permission to this policy. And for my webinar attendees, I want to do everything for you. So I actually want to show you how I can add additional permissions to this policy. And so in the top right hand corner, I have my add button. And I'm going to now give you access to the identity access management. So this is ZIM. And I have a long list of different policies or actions that I'm allowing for this group to have as well. But one of them that I think that I'll probably do most often is allow someone to actually edit their password. And so that's where we have some policies that allow you to do that, as well as the remove access keys and create access keys for users and lists is where you're going to allow someone to actually have that ability to create and update those passwords. But for today, we'll just give you guys access to create policies, and I'll also give you access to create groups and create users. Now I'll go ahead and I'll add my resource and I'll add my permission. And you'll see I now have ZIM in this action, as well as where it says Gnosis. When you look at these lists of actions in this part of the screen, this is actually showing you a little bit of what's going on the back end. And once I go to the next screen, you'll actually see more of what's going on in the back end. But this is where it gets a bit more technical. And this is also where down the line, once you understand how these actions are set up and how they're written, then you'll be able to create your own actions. And that's where you'll be able to come up and go to that final step of creating policies, creating customized policies, where you're writing them all by hand, essentially. So let's go ahead and create another permission. And we've done identity access management, we've done data flow. Let's go and go back to our data collector and make sure that they have some access, make sure they have access to the data collector so they can manage data, but they can also build, edit, and delete forms from the data collection. And we'll add our resource and add permission. And let's do one more here. And for this one, we'll actually use deny. So we're not going to give them access to manage the report environment, but maybe later on we'll give them access to actually list the view. So we'll do two more here. So I'm going to add that resource, and then I'll do one more allow, which will do our reports again, and we'll choose it so that they can list the tables, reports, and dashboards. And add that permission, and then we'll hit next. Now this is where I said it does get a bit more technical, and this is where you can see what this customized, what the policy actually looks like. And so when you're ready to customize your policy, how you need to structure it. So this is almost like a way for you to learn how these policies are created in the back end. Then I'll hit next, and it allows me to actually assign it to individual users, but because we're going to do best practices here, we're going to assign this policy to our new group, so our webinar group, and then we hit create. And looks like it's telling us looks like I made a mistake here, so I'll go back I have to go all the way back here. And while I'm doing this, John, is there a question?
There are no questions, but I do know that when I was learning the Zerion platform, I had trouble understanding why you would want to give deny permissions out. And I actually came across a real world example this week, and I wanted to share it with everybody because it really helps illustrate the intention of doing that. So the first thing to understand is that, like Berit had said earlier, when you first make a user, they are defaulted to having no access. So they're effectively denied out of everything. We actually currently just recently hired 3 new people to Zerion. And if you were paying very close attention to some of the policies, we have an internal group for our testing environment that everybody is assigned to. And in that internal group policy, they have access to do a lot of different things. Now, because we are training these new employees on the platforms, we wanted to give them all those access rights, and we added them to the group. However, we wanted to make sure that they weren't able to break anything real badly. So I actually made another policy that gave them deny permissions for doing things like deleting, so they are unable to delete. So at that point, what you have is that user who is new has a conflict. One of the policies says that they are able to delete data flows, and then the new policy I made tells them they're not able to delete data flows. And when you run into a scenario like that, the deny permission takes priority. So if you have those 2 conflicts, then the user will not be able to take that action. And so what I have is those users are attached to that group with that deny policy. And as they become more proficient with the services, I can take them out of that group, and then they won't have that conflict anymore. And then they'll be able to do the delete actions.
Great. I think that's a great use case. Thanks, John. Now on my screen, what you can see is the actual end result of the technical side of what we have with the policy that we just created. So I was able to go through and I've assigned it to my user group. And now looking at the policy, I can identify what the effect is and the actions. So the effect, that's our allow, and then the allow or deny. And then you'll see what resources that they have within the allow and the deny. Now let me go back into the policy screen here, and let's actually go into our specific policy that we just created and our webinar attendees. And I can see right away that I have these 2 users assigned, and under the groups, I have that 1 group assigned. So under the users, I actually didn't individually assign these, and you can see that because it says that they are attached by group there. Now, I've created this policy, so let me actually show you how to add additional groups and assign additional groups to this policy. So you can kind of see where sometimes it makes sense to make the policy first and then go and assign it to groups and users you may have already created. So I'll go in here and I'll click the add button, and then I see a list of the different users I have, like the new employees as well as some other groups, and I would just select one of these and then hit add, and then I'd be done. So it's pretty easy to make those changes, as well as if you wanted to view the permissions again, then you'll be able to see how they're laid out. And you can also edit it from this screen. So if I wanted to change my name or make any changes, this is where I could do it. But this is where it makes sense to make that copy of a policy before you make any edits, because you can clearly see I could make multiple changes here and mess up this whole policy. And if I had a lot of users having access to this policy, then it could truly affect my workflow. All right, so just going to jump back to my slides here. Let's see, where do we leave off? So we've kind of left off with, I briefly told you about how do I use it before we actually jumped into the platform. But down below that, I have a quick diagram on somewhat of the workflow. So you create the user, you create the group, then you create the policy, and then you assign the user or the group to the policy. Some of the best practices that I just wanted to mention again is that make sure you use groups to, again, save you headache as well as help organize your account. I also find naming conventions extremely helpful. So when it comes to the policy that you've actually created, and I'll jump back to my policy page here. When I look at this list of policies, the one that says webinar attendees, I have no idea what kind of policies or permissions are included in here. And so the only way for me to see the permissions within this policy is to actually open up the policy and then see what it looks like with the different permissions. So to make your life easier, it's really helpful to have a naming convention for the policies that create. Like, for instance, the user management. That's very clear to me what that policy is meant for. Then we have the data flow access. Okay, I clearly understand that that means they have access to data flows, as well as like the data collector. So these are, you want to make sure when you create your policies, you make them as clear as possible and define what permissions are a part of that policy for later on when it comes to assigning them. Naming conventions are also really helpful for groups. Sometimes, as we saw today, it made sense for us to create a policy that matched the group. But if you're creating policies that will be used for multiple groups, then that won't necessarily be the case. And that's where you want to have policies named very clearly for what the permissions include. And the last best practice was just to copy the policies before making those major changes. As I mentioned, I do have the ABCs of management of users and how to kind of go through that whole recovery code and sharing that information with them. And I've gone through what groups are, and I've even defined step by step what you have within the policy generation and what each portion is designed for. So this is just more information and more content to make sure that you are successful when you're building out your policies and your users and your groups within ZIM. That being said, I don't want to take up any more of your time unless you have additional questions. So here's just a quick snapshot of all the different support tools that we have available for you. After today's session, I am going to be sending over a PDF with this information as well as today's recording, and that will all be available to you in the next 48 hours. And each one of these is a link, so it'll bring you to the different resources that we have available for you. And unless there aren't any additional questions, I just want to thank everybody for taking your time out today and joining us for the session. And I hope that you found this helpful. And John, are there any other questions that came about?
There were not, Berit. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. And if anything comes up, please let us know.